Welcome to Reading the Bible Together and to Genesis chapter 29, where Jacob is on the search for a wife. Now, unfortunately, this means he'll also end up with a father-in-law, which often tends to be part of the deal. And Jacob is about to learn that when it comes to deals, there are people who are far, far craftier than even he. Like, for instance, his father-in-law-to-be, Laban. But first, Jacob has to meet his prospective bride. And he does so, just like his dad had done, at a well. Now, this is the same town, Haran, but a different well. Rebekah had been spotted by Abraham's servant at the town well. This is an agricultural well, though, which is out in the fields. It's described for us. Its opening is covered by a large stone to prevent evaporation, as well as to keep creatures from falling within and contaminating the water supply. It's also an indication of ownership, which, as we learned in previous chapters, is jealously guarded. The large stone may well require combined strength to shift it, guaranteeing the ongoing mutual cooperation of the shepherds and further protecting the well from individual interlopers. Now, Jacob, we're told, comes to the land of the Easterners, as they are known to him. It's soon established that he has arrived in the environs of Haran, and Laban, his kinsman, is alive and well and known to them. Not only that, but look, here comes his daughter Rachel with her flock to be watered. Now, Jacob, wanting a little bit of alone time with Rachel, tries to move the others along, encouraging them to water their flocks and hit the road. But they're having none of it, telling Jacob that the deal is that the well is opened only when all the flocks have arrived. This well is a valuable resource, and when it's used in this way, nobody can use it alone. Everybody has to use it all at the same time. That way, that resource cannot be unfairly exploited. Now, the next passage reads like a scene from a movie. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Now, let's unpack this a bit. First of all, notice it says, when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep. That's a fine-looking young woman, thinks Jacob, and a fine-looking flock of sheep, which means Laban is not a poor man. Trust Jacob to take note of such a detail. Inspired by the sight of Rachel, not to mention the sight of the sheep, Jacob springs into action. Despite a gentle upbringing among the tents, Jacob possesses sufficient strength to single-handedly shift the stone from the well and water Rachel's flock. We cease to hear of the other shepherds who are doubtless rolling their eyes and making comments at this burst of energetic activity. A similar scene takes place in Exodus with Moses and the daughters of Reuel at a well. I recall attempting to look strong and mighty upon meeting my wife for the first time, which was made difficult by having a cast removed from my now pale and withered arm just days before. Happily, there were no heavy stones to shift. But back to our story. Then Jacob, we read, Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. Must have been quite a kiss. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. Now, this resembles more and more the meeting of Rebekah, which is referenced for us in case we forgot her story. She too ran and told Laban, who, as in the previous story, runs out to meet Jacob. And as in that previous story, when he brought the servant of Abraham home, he brings Jacob home. Now, maybe you recall that back in chapter 24, once marriage arrangements had been made, Laban tried to delay the servant of Abraham, to try to extract some more dowry from the deal, perhaps, but Abraham's servant would have none of it. Here, having learned from experience, Laban makes sure that Jacob does indeed stick around, for he, Laban, has a cunning plan. A month after the initial meeting, Laban sits Jacob down. It's time to talk money. He says, just because you're a relative of mine, should you work for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. Now, this seems generous, but it's actually a trap. If he accepts a wage, Jacob becomes downgraded from honored family guest to employee. Jacob, who's no fool, makes a counteroffer. He says, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Now, we're not told where the 7-year figure comes from. It's possible that we're unaware of a similar ancient tradition. We know that the 7-year time frame appears again and again throughout Scripture. However, Laban magnanimously states, well, better you than someone else, which is maybe not entirely complimentary, and the deal is done. Jacob will work 7 years for Rachel's hand. Now let's backtrack a bit though. We're introduced to Laban's 2 daughters, Leah, the older, and Rachel, the younger. And we read, Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Now, this is actually a little more harsh than it sounds. Leah is an ancient word meaning both cow and strong. She was also apparently blessed with a nasty squint. In contrast, Rachel is described as having a lovely figure and being beautiful. And Jacob, seeing only surface beauty, is in love with Rachel. So, how will Laban ever unload daughter Leah, strong as an ox, but blind as a bat, particularly if his younger daughter goes first? Leftovers are hard to sell, and it takes 7 years, during which time you might notice no suitors come forward for Leah's hand in that 7-year time frame. It takes 7 years for Laban's plan to come to fruition. So, finally 7 years pass. Jacob's time of servitude is at an end, which we are told seemed more like 7 days than 7 years. Such was his love for Rachel. And finally, Jacob approached Laban. Cutting right to the chase, he says, give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to make love to her. So, a feast is prepared, the party's in full swing. Laban assures that Jacob has had a snootful, and his own eyes blurry from celebration. Laban brings Jacob to the wedding tent. The couple are left to themselves. So, for Jacob, morning brings not only a hangover, but a nasty surprise. Following a night of, boy, this girl is stronger than she looks, the sunrise reveals it to be Leah. Even through his hangover, Jacob realizes that a fast one has been pulled. And he says to Laban, what is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Literally, and this is a wonderful joke which we miss in English, why have you Jacobed me? Jacob had been out-Jacobed. Laban has this all worked out. He's the spider, Jacob's the fly, and Jacob's love for Rachel is the web. Laban replied, oh, well, it's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Well, hey, how come you didn't mention that before? He continues, finish this daughter's bridal week, and then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. The bridal week, the ancient version of the honeymoon, is intended to ensure pregnancy. So 7 days later, the exhausted Jacob is given Rachel for a wife, and we read, Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. Well, maybe you're getting the idea that favoritism, which is a constant theme throughout these stories in Genesis, always leads to trouble in these stories, and it will here too. And this time God steps in. Leah knows that she's not loved, despite continuing to receive conjugal visits on a regular basis. And God knows that Leah knows that she's not loved. So to kindle Jacob's better treatment and regard of her, God, we are told, opened Leah's womb and blessed her with a son, and with another, and another, and another, before giving her a much-needed break. The boys are named Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. All very significant names. The first three names reflect Leah's hope that Jacob will eventually come to love her. It's actually a bit heartbreaking. She hopes that the first, Reuben, will cause Jacob to love her. With the second, she acknowledges God's pity in her being unloved. In the third, she's hoping only for her husband to become attached to her, having given up entirely on love. And with the fourth, she's given up even on that and simply praises God, the true source of her love, for the gift of yet another son. Well, as you can imagine, predictably, things between Jacob and Rachel are now becoming increasingly strained, what with Leah banging out children at a furious pace. But for the result, we'll have to wait until next time. And for next time, chapter 30, we're going to have to wait until after Easter week. You see, Holy Week is filled to the brim with special services, and preparations for all of those services will mean setting these studies aside until after Easter. And then we'll see you again for Genesis chapter 30 as we resume reading the Bible together on the Monday after Easter Sunday. See you then.